Imagine reading this. I love you. I'm going to miss you. These were some of the last words a doctor's wife ever read from her husband. A goodbye note found on a laptop that finally revealed a battle he had been fighting in complete silence.
So that's where we're starting. We're going to tackle a really tough subject today, one that's happening right under our noses, but is so rarely discussed. This is the silent epidemic of physician suicide.
Before that final goodbye, the full note actually began with, "I'm sorry I'm not there, I still love you." It's just a haunting message, isn't it? And it immediately grounds us in the very real, very personal cost of this crisis.
Now, we're going to hear from a doctor who actually survived this kind of crisis, but his story shows just how deep this can go. He was carrying this immense weight, this guilt from a medical error. It was just one single moment in an operating room, but it played on a loop in his mind over and over until he convinced himself he was a killer.
So, how did it get to that point? Well, let's break it down. It all started with a totally routine surgery, just something to stop some bleeding. But then, a complication. Something went wrong with a new breathing tube. And just like that, the patient's heart rate drops all the way to 0. They tried everything they could, but it was too late. The patient wasn't going to wake up. And for this doctor, that entire sequence of events became this absolutely unbearable burden.
And in his mind, there was only one way to serve justice, one way to make it right. And it's so important to get this. This wasn't just about depression. It was this twisted, crushing sense of responsibility that pushed him right to the absolute brink. He genuinely believed that taking his own life was the only way to atone for the life that was lost.
That's an incredibly powerful story. But here's the thing that's so hard to hear. It's not unique, not by a long shot. So now we need to zoom out from this one personal tragedy to see the staggering numbers that show this is a full-blown global problem.
Okay, just take a look at these numbers. They're pretty stark. For female doctors, the risk of suicide is more than double that of other women. More than double! For male doctors, it's over 40% higher. And this isn't just a problem for experienced physicians. Almost a third of all medical residents are dealing with depression. And then, when the pandemic hit, well, over 20% of all essential workers had considered suicide. This is not about a few isolated cases. This is a systemic vulnerability.
And this crisis, it knows no borders. It's absolutely global. Headlines are pouring out of Mexico, from Michoacan, Guadalajara, reporting on doctors and medical residents taking their own lives, often because of workplace harassment and just unbearable pressure.
And the stories just keep coming from other parts of the country, like Puebla. You read the news reports and you see the same pattern: depression, fighting, burnout, all creating this toxic environment inside Mexican hospitals for the very people who are supposed to be healing others. And it extends all across Latin America. A medical student's suicide in Chile sparks outrage. A resident's death in Colombia leads to heavy criticism of their medical education system. The pattern is it's devastatingly clear no matter where you look.
So you see all this, and you have to ask, right? Why? Why is this happening to the very people who have dedicated their lives to taking care of us? Well, a massive piece of the puzzle is a deeply ingrained culture of silence, and this powerful stigma against asking for help.
I mean, this quote really says it all. I'm a doctor. I don't want it on my record. This is what psychiatrists hear all the time from their patients who happen to be doctors. There's this profound fear that admitting you have a mental health struggle is going to tarnish your professional record and put the career you've worked your entire life for in jeopardy.
And that fear? It is not irrational. It comes from things exactly like this. Look at this question. This is a real question, question 30, from an actual state medical licensing application. It forces doctors to disclose a diagnosis, and it doesn't frame it as a treatable condition, but as a potential health risk to the public.
So, on the one hand, the mission seems straightforward: protect the public. Of course, but the unintended consequence of questions like these is that they actively discourage doctors from getting the very help that would make them healthier and better at their jobs. It creates this dangerous paradox where the very thing meant to keep us safe actually makes things worse.
But here's where the story starts to turn. That awful paradox. It lit a fire. And now you've got this incredible movement of doctors, families, and researchers all fighting to change the system from the inside out.
It all led to this landmark moment. The Federation of State Medical Boards. That's the national organization that all the state boards look to. They released a huge report with 35 recommendations aimed directly at physician wellness and burnout. This was a really big deal. It was the system finally admitting it was part of the problem.
And their number one recommendation? It was an absolute bombshell. The FSMB itself came right out and said that asking about mental health history isn't helpful, and in fact, it stops doctors from getting treatment. They argued for focusing only on whether a doctor has a current issue, not on past diagnoses.
So they took this to a national meeting. You can picture it like a mini Congress, but for all the country's medical boards. They put it to a vote, and with a resounding aye, the motion passed. The recommendations were adopted. It was a pivotal victory, sending a clear message from the very top that it's okay to seek help.
Now that's a massive step forward, for sure, but even as the system starts to change, for the people who have already lived through this crisis, the scars remain. So let's return to the human cost and the enduring impact on those left behind.
Remember the doctor from the beginning of our story, the one who survived? Well, this is from his wife, and she explains that even though he got help, their family isn't fully recovered. She says the trauma from that time is like an injury that has never completely healed. It's just still there.
And for the families who lost a loved one, the aftermath is incredibly complex. They become the family that thing happened to, the one people whisper about. They're left with boxes full of letters from patients, praising this warm, gentle doctor, having no idea he was suffering. And they have to live with the knowledge that it was fear over a medical license, fear of talking to even his closest friends, that kept their loved ones silent until it was too late. And all of this leaves us with a fundamental question we have to ask ourselves as a society. What do we demand of those who care for us, and at what cost? We expect our healers to be superhuman, but they are human, and the price of that silence is one we can no longer afford to pay.